Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. We are so happy you're here today. Today's webinar is titled Fireproof, Building Educator Resilience to Decrease Teacher Burnout. My name is Jenny Okers and I am a Director of Marketing here with Learner's Edge, and each day we talk with teachers just like you who are seeking strategies to help them in their classroom. Because we understand you are always looking for ways to improve your teaching and your students' learning, we've put together this webinar with the hope that you can take these suggestions and put them to use in your classroom right away. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items to help you understand how you can participate in today's event. So we have taken a screenshot of what you should be seeing as an attendee. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop up in the upper right-hand corner. Most of you are already using the audio on your computer, and if for some reason that method isn't as clear, please feel free to listen via phone using the numbers provided on your attendee panel. We would encourage you to send us questions throughout the presentation using the questions pane of the control panel. Send in your questions at any time, and we'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If we run out of time, we will do our best to send you individualized responses after the webinar. Also notice the hand with the arrow within your control panel. We may be asking for a show of hands during today's webinar, so you can click the hand to raise it or put it down. And also notice there are handouts available for you to download. Finally, typically within 24 hours of today's presentation, you will receive an email with a link to a recorded version of the webinar, along with all the slides and handouts that were shared. Thank you again for taking time out of your day to join us. And with that, I am thrilled to introduce my colleagues, Keely Swartzer and Barb Istis. I will turn it over to them so that they can introduce themselves.
Hi, welcome to Fireproof. My name is Keely Swartzer and I'm the Director of Professional Development at Learner's Edge. For 11 years I taught elementary special education, and prior to being hired at Learner's Edge I was the special education coordinator for 8 years. I chose this topic specifically because I felt the effects of burnout in special education and oftentimes wonder why. Additionally, I do know that teacher burnout is like wildfire. It's everywhere. And I feel for the teachers and the students that are affected.
And hello everyone, I'm Barb Istis, Curriculum and Instruction Specialist here at Learner's Edge. Before I began my work here, I was a 6th grade language arts teacher for 25 years and still love working with teachers and coursework related to literacy and all other important things. And really excited to be here today with you, Keely, to share this important topic.
Being a teacher is easy. It's like riding a bike, except the bike is on fire, you're on fire, and everything is on fire. I know all educators can relate to this quote, but the question is, if everything's on fire, how do we keep from getting burned? Today we're going to answer that question. Are you ready, Barb? Are you ready?
Yeah, let's go.
Fireproof does not mean the fire will never come. It means that when it does, you will be able to withstand it. This is one of my favorite quotes from Fireproof, the movie. I just wanted to start by telling a personal story that has to do with just resilience. In 2007, I got a divorce. I lost both my parents and was constantly sick, eventually having my tonsils removed. All of that happened within about a 9-month window. I was also parenting 2 small children on my own and working full-time as a special education teacher. I was tired pretty much all the time and drained emotionally. When I look back on that trial in my life, I realized the only reason I got up each and every day was to continue on because of the resilience that I had. And my mother had always said, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And while I hated that quote as a child, hated to hear it over and over again, I do realize that it's one of the statements that fireproofed me. She knew that the fire would come, but she wanted me to be ready and be able to withstand it. Professionally, this has really helped me when I was searching for new positions. Applying and interviewing, getting your hopes up and not getting a job can really be a bummer. And if that happens over and over and over again, it's kind of becomes a little sad. But having that resilience built in allowed me to just keep trying. Well, I know my story is just 1 in a million and probably not all that traumatic. It is relevant because I really want everyone to become fireproof, and today I want to help fireproof you. So our outcomes for today are basically to do that, to fireproof you. We're going to talk about understanding the impacts of teacher burnout on the school community. We're going to learn about resilience, reflect on your own level of burnout and resilience, discover some easy to implement strategies to build teacher resilience, and also make a plan for tomorrow. So Merriam-Webster describes or defines teacher burnout as exhaustion of physical or emotional strength or motivation, usually the result of prolonged stress or frustration. Merriam-Webster also gives 2 examples, and both of those examples just happen to be involving teachers. Why do you think that is, Barb?
I'm not surprised at all. We know it. Teaching is very stressful, and probably just the universal and classic example.
Exactly. Teaching is hard and stressful, and it's even documented that way in the dictionary. So why are we talking about this, educator resilience and teacher burnout? Well, some of these statistics are pretty sad to me. If teachers are getting into their field of education, we want them to be satisfied in their career so that they stick around and make big impacts with kids. But as we see here, some of the stats tell us 39% of teachers report that they are very satisfied with their work. So that's quite a few that are not satisfied. 48% of teachers report that they're regularly under great stress. So that's half of teachers feel that way each and every day. And then 55% of teachers report that their morale is low or very low. 41% of teachers leave the profession within 5 years of starting. And losing early career teachers costs the U.S. about $2,200,000,000 every year. So teacher burnout is epidemic. And then the teachers that are sticking around, the teachers that we can retain, are doing an excellent job, but often working in unsustainable conditions. Many of them are working upwards of 60 hours. So what we'd like you to do now is use the raise your hand feature and tell us if you're working more than 45 hours on average per week. And we'll give you a minute to do that.
I'll have to get on my calculator. We're not going to be quite at 100%, but it looks like we're getting close. Go ahead and click on that little hand with the arrow up button if you do typically find yourself working more than 45 hours a week.
All right, and at this point it looks like about 81% of you as teachers do work more than 45 hours a week, which really, Barb, is not surprising.
No.
We know that teachers are sometimes overly committed to the career that they're involved in and helping kids.
Yeah, actually sounds even a little bit low, because I just think that 45 to 50 would be pretty straight across the board.
Right.
Yeah.
So teacher burnout has impacts all around. It has impacts on school communities, the students themselves, the school district, the community, but then also the teacher as well. And so some statistics for you. According to the CDC in 2006, inner city high school teachers were more likely to get an ulcer than any other profession. And I just found that crazy that we're talking about a person, because of their career choice, getting an actual ulcer. Also, we know that long-term stress can lead to serious health problems. It can actually rewire the brain, making a person more prone to anxiety and depression. And then many times our family and friends, the relationships that we have with family and friends, if we're burnt out or stressed out continuously, those can suffer as well. Teachers have 46% higher annual health care costs. There's an increased risk of heart attack and stroke. It can speed up the aging process, which we don't need help with, right, Barb? No. And it can also impact fertility. So there's just lots of even health factors that come in as burnout plays a part in educators' lives. What was one thing, Barb, that you noticed physically when you were burning out?
No question, many of the things you address, but I would say for me it was more the sense of feeling overwhelmed at the end of the day instead of feeling productive, like, oh, I got all this done, and I'm such a list maker and such a, step by step going to get these things done in a day. And on those times when I would really just walk away feeling more overwhelmed than productive. And then I knew I had to take a minute, step back, and really look at, the fatigue and just that sense of feeling overwhelmed. And I had to address it. So,
yeah, and I think for me, I would, at the time I was teaching, I was also parenting two small kids, and I would get home and I just remember being super crabby and having very little frustration tolerance or patience for my own kids, which definitely played a factor in our home life, and so that was sad and made me realize also that I need to do something a little bit different. Some other impacts: the school district has to obviously pay sick days. Every once in a while, a teacher might take a quote-unquote mental health day, and many of us need those. So the school district ends up paying sick days and substitutes. If teachers really burn out to the point of leaving the field, there is the time, energy, and financial resources involved in hiring new teachers. Teachers that are feeling burnout sometimes make poor decisions and may struggle to stay in compliance. And then the biggest impact that we're concerned about is just the impact on our students. It has been shown that moods and attitudes about school are largely shaped by a teacher's energy and attitude. So if a teacher is feeling burnout and showing that in their classroom, sometimes students may develop anxiety or just have a lower enthusiasm for learning. We have to remember too that school is sometimes the safest place for students in their day, and if we're not at our best, it's really hard to be that safe relationship for kiddos. Sometimes poorly planned or implemented lessons can impact student learning, and then also sometimes there are just poor relationships with teachers and students when a teacher is feeling burnout. The bottom line is we impact students each and every day, every single interaction, and if we're burnt out and showing signs of it, our kids know it. All right, we are going to move on to our poll question. And that poll question is, what is the number one thing that causes you stress or pushes you toward burnout in your position? Your choices are paperwork, student behavior, a lack of administrative support, expectations, or challenging parents. And unfortunately, you can only pick one of those. So we'll give you a couple minutes to make your choice.
You should have had all of the above.
All of the above. That would have been good.
That would have been the answer.
That would have been the most popular choice, I'm pretty sure.
I think we may have a clear winner.
Oh, yeah, great.
We'll give you a few more minutes, or a few more seconds, pardon me, to click your answer. Great. All right, Keely, here are the results.
All right.
So you can see 65% of you say expectations. Too many things to do with too little time. Followed by, it appears, student behavior at 15%, and then a smattering of the other options.
Well, that's not super surprising. I think that we all suffer from that full plate syndrome where things just get piled on and piled on and piled on. And many times when things are piled on, nothing is taken off. And so that is just really not surprising.
No, it isn't at all.
Well, thanks for participating in the poll. So we know about teacher burnout and we know why we're talking about it today, but the real work really is in building your resilience. So we're going to move from burnout to building resilience in educators. The great thing about resilience is that it can be increased. And so just like my mom worked at increasing resilience in me, we can take responsibility for our own resilience and work to increase it. We're going to talk about many ways to do that. So I started to become interested in resilience after looking at research related to adverse childhood experiences. This is a study done now in many states where the Department of Health studies the long-term effects of adverse experiences on children under 18 that are experiencing things like abuse or living with a parent with mental health conditions or having a parent who's incarcerated or having lived through a divorce. The study found that the more ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, you have or have experienced, the higher likelihood of poor outcomes as adults. Examples are increased health conditions, early death, etc. There's a link to the study on the slide here. It's very, very informative and just has a lot of great information. But as I was studying and reading about the ACEs study, I began to wonder what makes the difference. How are some people who've experienced the exact same ACEs as others able to, quote unquote, make it while others are not and are still struggling through life? And so the answer kind of came to me, and I really do believe that that has to do with the level of resilience of the person who experiences the ACEs. But it also kind of led me to think about how might resilience affect teacher burnout. Barb, what do you think? What do you think the link is between resilience and burnout?
Well, I think it starts with an awareness of burnout. So we recognize the symptoms in ourselves or in other people. I think teachers are pretty good at that. And then knowing those indicators, then we can react with resilience. There's some that's pretty innate or intuitive, but a lot of it really has to be intentional. Like, all right, there's a problem here, and teachers are good at this. And then what can I do to incorporate some more resilience or grab onto that? So it's really knowing yourself and then knowing some good practice and strategies, which is why everybody's here today, Keely.
It is why everybody's here. All right, so let's dig in. I have a study on resilience in urban teachers, and I recognize that the study is a little bit old, but the information is so relevant that I wanted to touch on it. Barb, I know you've looked over some of these points. What are your thoughts just in general?
Well, for sure, I think professional development is the key right there. It's just a matter of knowing at this time, this year, what are my greatest needs, and based on all the students who I'm working with today. And as we know, that's very fluid. It changes. It can change week by week in some classrooms and districts. So just knowing what do my students need, and then what do I need to do to support them. So that professional development is key. That's why I love working here, because we know it's so powerful and important in teacher and student outcomes. So that's what I think it is.
Right, and I share the same thought there. I love the idea that professional learning, so both in point 2 and point 8, are keys in building resilience. And I know that I, as a teacher, just have a love of learning, as do many, many teachers. So I just think that's key there. The other thing that I found really fascinating here is the role that values play in building resilience or having resilience. And I think that's really key. I did, because the research here is old, I kind of went and looked at some more recent research on why teachers stay in the field. And there's probably 4 or 5 different things. One of them is that they just love relationship with kids. They just love to have and build relationships with students. Teachers, not surprisingly, have an overwhelming desire to help. Teachers tend to stay longer when they have regular supportive communication with their administrators. Also, when the school district or the building has a very solid behavior management system, or maybe positive behavior intervention system, and they're able to cope with different behavioral or emotional challenges of the students easily, or more easily, I should say. Mentorship is also something that keeps teachers in the field. And then both higher student achievement and higher parent engagement. We're going to talk about those as we move forward here. So if administrators know this, they know the study on resilience in urban teachers, but also some of the newer research, what can they do? And so if you're an administrator out there, or if you're a teacher leader, some things to think about. It's totally appropriate for you to be taking proactive steps as an administrator to be building emotional resilience in your staff. The bottom line is teachers, they want time to be able to share their belief system and their stories. They also want to be able to talk about their successes. So if you can build time into your your meetings or different opportunities within your professional development days for teachers just to talk about the things that are going really well and why they're in the teaching capacity in the first place, that's going to go a long way. We also know that if we develop and improve mentoring systems, that research will tell you mentoring really helps both the mentor and the mentee. But also, I know as a special education teacher, just because I had already been teaching for 3 years didn't mean that I no longer needed a mentor. So I'm an advocate for creating teacher partnerships. So even if a teacher's been in the field for 5 or 10 years, it doesn't mean that they don't need their go-to person. And so I would love for administrators to really think about the idea of creating teaching partners. Also, just developing relational trust among staff, and then supporting your teachers as well. So at this time, what I'd like you to do is, if you have seen administrators build resilience in teachers without even knowing it, what are some of the ways that you've seen that happen? And so you can just type your response in the question bar.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and give you a few minutes. We'd love to hear some of the great strategies that have been implemented by your administrators. We'll compile those and we'll share all of them with you in the email that you receive as a follow-up. Looks like, Keely, we have a few coming in.
Yep. Oh, so here's one participant that shared that her administrator lets them do a 5-minute check with their table mates at the beginning of every staff meeting. So I'm assuming that's just a way for teachers to build relationship and build trust with each other. So that's a great idea. And here's another one that says their administrators always share a positive story or an uplifting story in the staff bulletin. So those are 2 great ideas. And as Jenny said, we'll compile those ideas and put them in the handouts for you as we move forward. So just as administrators have some responsibility in building resilience, teacher, you also have some responsibility in building your own resilience and decreasing your burnout as well. So as we move forward, there's going to be a number of different ideas that will both increase resilience and decrease burnout. One of the key things here that talks about is when you're questioning why you're doing what you're doing, which Barb, I know as a teacher, we've done before. There are days when we're like, why are we doing this? But what they suggest here is that you write it down. And I do remember when I talked before about that trial in my life where I lost both my parents and was going through divorce, it really made me question, am I doing in my life what I need to be doing? And part of that, big part of it, is my career. I mean, I really had to sit down and look at my values and my ethics and my life goals to decide, yes, this is something I need to do. And out of that came a life plan, which is actually just a written plan in a couple different areas of your life. But I can always refer back to that to know that I am in education because that's where I'm supposed to be. And so that was pretty powerful to have that. Also, to increase your emotional intelligence, I've read a recent article that suggests that you can increase your emotional intelligence by just simply observing your own feelings and your own behavior. So taking a minute just to stop and think about, how am I feeling right now? Oh, I just responded in that way. I wonder why I did that. Just kind of thinking through some of those things. But also practicing empathy with yourself. So maybe you do something and it's not the best choice, but just knowing that you have to not always be so hard on yourself, and really kind of looking at that. And then great advice for any of us really is try to respond instead of to react. And so really thinking through, I need to respond to this situation, but instead of just being quick and here's my reaction, I'm going to think it through and then respond appropriately. The last thing that I want to talk about on this page is volunteering. And volunteering really helps you make connections and kind of see the bigger picture. And volunteering is really healthy for the person that's doing the volunteering. So if you could use your raise the hand feature if you volunteer, and we'll give you a couple minutes to do that. This is challenging because we're always constantly, Barb, we talked about this, putting so much of ourselves into education or teaching. Seems like we kind of live and breathe helping all the time. So it's sometimes challenging to get to that point of extra time to volunteer. But what we're showing is that 21% have raised your hand as far as time to volunteer. And while I definitely commend the 21% that are able to do that, it's not surprising because they're just, again, back to that full plate syndrome. There are just so many things that we're asked to do. But if you can make it work, it really does help you just develop some resiliency and see the bigger impact that you're making.
Right, and Keeley, I've noted several schools that have actual volunteer programs where teachers and students together are doing outreach projects that have to do with their community and volunteering. And it's for both the teachers and the students, and
the teachers, the students, and whoever is receiving from that.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we're going to move into talking about just how do we build that resilience. And one of the key things that Barb alluded to earlier is you just have to know yourself. And so you really need to kind of ask yourself, what brings you down in your career, what lifts you up, and what drives you? And I have taken some time to think about that. And while I was in the field of education, or actually teaching in public schools or as a special education coordinator, one of the things that really brought me down was a lack of administrative support. I just found that really, really challenging to continue to want to stay engaged and positive in my environment. What lifted me up was being able to build relationships of any kind, whether it be with students or co-teachers or administrators, and then also just to have some fun at work and laugh. And then what really drives me, and for me it's learning. Anytime that I can learn something, I am on board and ready to go. What about you, Barb?
Similar, I would say, yeah. What brings me down is just feeling I have too much to do, because I do want to. I want to get all those goals met and do all the things that I need to do in a day. And the reality is, it's nearly impossible in our line of work. So that brings me down, and what lifts me up is really, again, are the students and my colleagues, but students especially, because sixth graders are pretty interesting people and fun, and so much to enjoy about their behaviors and their learning. So at the end of the day, that just kept me going, and it really did build me up.
Awesome. So I also have put some links to 2 quizzes that you can take at another time, and I did take both the quizzes, so I'll tell you my results here in a minute. But the first is, are you experiencing burnout? So you can click on the link and you can go and find out whether or not you're experiencing teacher burnout. Before I took this new job at Learner's Edge, I've been here 3, almost 4 months maybe, I scored a 30, and what that meant was the embers of my passion for teaching needed stoking. And luckily, working here at Learner's Edge has definitely done that. But at the time, I would say I was pretty highly burnt out of the position that I was in. And then the next quiz is, what is your level of resilience? And so I took that quiz and I got the response of, you're quite resilient, which I was pretty proud of. So that was great. But comes back to the fact that you need to be aware of whether or not you're experiencing any burnout, and if you are, what can you do about it? So one of the things that you can do is to build your own support systems, and that's ultimately your responsibility. So we've shown that a lack of community is one of the primary factors that creates burnout at work, and that's not just in education, but that's across the board. We also know that teacher collaboration and sharing responsibility for all students increases retention, but statistics show that only half of teachers really plan with anybody other than themselves. And fewer than 50% work at schools where teachers concern themselves with students outside of their own classroom. Teacher collaboration gives teachers time and support to handle challenges and succeed, and that's really the bottom line of resilience. Collaboration can lower turnover rates, increase satisfaction, build strong relationships. One of the things that I found was planning by myself just became too inefficient, and so it worked really well to kind of co-plan with somebody and share ideas. And then collaboration also allows you to use the strengths of other people where you may have a deficit in an area and someone else has a strength. You can kind of work together to mitigate those. Also, research shows that lesson quality improves with multiple teacher input. So I suggest that you work on collaboration, but you don't have to start huge. You can start really small, and maybe that just looks like finding one person on your team to share resources with. It might just be a lesson plan, or even just having a conversation about student behavior and trying to problem solve some of those things out. Here are some other ideas for building support measures. One of the things that I really want to touch base on is do not withdraw. I think sometimes when we get really burnt out or we're really feeling zapped, our first inclination is to kind of back up and not really want to deal with people. But I am going to tell you, even though it's easy to do, don't do it. Even if it means finding one person to connect with on a regular basis, maybe even once a week with a teaching partner or someone to have lunch with, just getting out and being relational a little bit will help with the teacher burnout. Another thing on here is forge cross-school partnerships, and this isn't thought of that often. An example I have is I worked in a setting for day treatment program, and that basically was a separate site school for 7th through 12th graders that had very high behavioral or emotional struggles. They weren't able to be in a mainstream school, and one of the things that we found was because we were working in this very intense setting, our view of typical development from those teenagers was totally skewed. And so what we did was we found mainstream teachers in schools that we were working with to really be able to touch base and have conversations about standards and curriculum and lesson plans, but it also gave us an opportunity to think about what does a typically developing teenager look like, act like, sound like, and then we were able to kind of build the skills in the kids that we were working with to get to that point. So that was just a very helpful partnership that we developed. It also talks about venting, and the one thing I want to say here is that it's really important to find a healthy place to vent, but don't stop there. It's really important that you choose to problem solve after that. So always be solution-based and looking for the next thing that you can do to make a situation better. What was one of the support systems that helped when you were teaching, Barb?
Well, definitely. You've already talked about this. Collaborating with my grade level colleague was just critical for me and just added a whole other layer of trust and support, not only in the lesson planning and behavioral interactions. It was just really on a level of being human beings and addressing all the concerns that came into our grade level every day. It was so important to me. And that's just something that we intended to do. We set out to do, be really cohesive, and ended up having a great collaboration. I value that, but I want to add too, because this is also on your list, is that on the other side of that is to become a mentor. And I often took that opportunity whenever there were new teachers, and that typically is the way it works. A new teacher comes in and they'll set up a mentorship partnership, but ultimately I think it is really just great practice, because for me, not only in articulating and consistently sharing professional feedback, I was also solidifying my own teaching practice. And and at points question, well, why do I give you that advice? And so it's just such a win-win scenario and empowering on a lot of different levels. So I really saw out both of those, grade level right here in my zone, but also mentoring in some other way.
Yeah, I think sometimes building relationships with people that aren't on your team or that you wouldn't normally work with is imperative to your own professional growth, just so that you start to understand what their responsibilities are and why they do what they do. And sometimes that just helps build a different support system within the building.
Absolutely. Great relationships.
So parent engagement, according to the U.S. Department of Education, parental engagement is a key factor in teacher retention. Teachers experience greater satisfaction when parental involvement grows. And so when I looked at this research, what I found was that teachers really want more parental engagement, but that parents also want more parental engagement. And for some reason, that just doesn't always happen. And so sometimes teachers need to be very, very intentional about pulling parents in a number of different ways. And so I like the idea of finding creative ways to bring parents into the classroom. And so we're going to talk about overcommitment in a little bit, but I would encourage you to think about increasing parent engagement or working with an administrator to increase parent engagement. Maybe that's one of the yeses. Maybe that's one of the things that you do get involved in, because it really will help your own burnout, and also could provide some pretty meaningful experiences in a parent's life. And hopefully their value of education will increase, and that can have an enormous ripple effect. So parent engagement, but then also community building beyond parents. And so if you could raise your hand if your school has a focus on community involvement. And we'll give you a minute to do that, but while we do that, I'll go ahead and talk over the slide. So parent involvement we know is key, but also using the different resources that are within your community. You have libraries, there's Rotary clubs. I've seen some very cool partnerships with senior citizen centers, which is good, again, both for the students that are working there, but also the seniors themselves. Many schools will host curriculum nights or art showcases or different kinds of showcases. I know the primary school in my district uses a math night to get parents in. And so kids and parents will play math games or do different math activities. And it's always important to invite input from your community members and ask community members for involvement, maybe even just to serve on committees or different things. If we go back to the hand raise, it looks like about 16% of the schools that you work in have good community involvement. Not a surprise. We kind of knew that would be a lower percentage, but definitely an area for improvement. Barb, what do you think the link is between community involvement and decreasing burnout?
Oh, for sure. I can speak to that from personal experience, but just a comment first on the percentage. I think that's something you would always want to be able to implement and to support some kind of community outreach or programming. but the reality of, the follow through and the professional oversight of that is it gets put at the end of the pile, and that is a really sad fact. So I know that's like a common struggle. But back to my idea about decreasing teacher burnout, I can speak exactly to the memory of this about in my 6th grade class, we had many students who were struggling with organization, just basic, keeping their backpacks together, their lockers, their desktops. They're just trying to keep track of things and their assignments. And we set up a very simple protocol for a few steps and connected those kids to one-on-ones with some community members. And these were people who just signed up, they wanted to be involved, and it was a once a week, one checkpoint with a student. They could come in. It was really pretty hands-off once I trained the adult and made the connection with the student, the adult. It was so powerful and really helpful. It was helpful to the student because they were able to explain and do follow-up and to show successes to this other adult who was the encourager, and that adult in turn felt great about coming in the school and contributing time and attention to this one kid. And then me as the teacher watching those relationships, and just the successful orientation of that was really win-win-win. Everybody felt good about it, and it was really one idea, one protocol that we developed and decided we're going to stick to this. This is going to be our community plan. And boy, we were able to, I'm sure I had 10 kids working with 10 different adults, throughout the course of a year. So it was really powerful.
Yeah, that is a great, and I love the idea of taking one thing and really focusing hard on that one thing, because I think sometimes we get all these ideas out there and we're splitting our attention between all those things, and we don't necessarily get a quality intervention with fidelity that way. And so that's a great thing. And I think the other piece of that is, as teachers, I feel like, if we have 30 kids in our classroom, or as a special ed teacher, 18 kids on your caseload, you feel the weight of that responsibility of all those kids' education on you and you alone. And I think when we're able to bring parents in or bring community members in, it helps relieve that a little bit. Back to that, just that it takes a village quote. Just being able to share that responsibility a little bit with parents or community members, I think is helpful to decrease burnout for educators as well. All right, so I would like to talk a little bit about the volume. So this is back to that full plate syndrome that I talked about. So we're going to talk a little bit about fluff eradication. And the quote here says, "I enjoy the work, but there's just too much of it." And I know that we can all relate to that. I bet if I did a hand raise right now, it would probably be 100% of people are overwhelmed with the amount of things that we have to do as educators. Work overload is one of the primary factors that creates burnout at work. Can reduce effectiveness. It gives us executive functioning overload. Our brain can be overstimulated, and sometimes it makes it hard to think clearly or to even register emotions. I know I could go on and on about the full plate syndrome. We're asked really to do too much with too little time. And unfortunately, there are impacts to our students and ourselves when that happens. I remember starting my role as a special ed coordinator, and I went in, I had a ton of ideas and thoughts about how I could change little things, or create even big initiatives that would really help students and teachers. And after 6 years, I realized that due to the volume of day-to-day and the emergencies that would kind of come in typically every day, there just really wasn't a lot of time to be able to implement the positive things that I had planned on, and that really weighed on me. That revelation really affected my job satisfaction immensely. I also remember just being completely paralyzed with the amount of work. There were certain times throughout the year where I was just like, I can't think straight. There was so much work. My working memory suffered a little bit sometimes. I would walk into the front office and stand there and not even really know why I was there. Has that ever happened to you?
I mean, we can all say yes, because we're multitaskers. We're going to do 10 things on the way to the office. We have this one thing to do, but there are 10 stops we can make. And yes, I'm exaggerating, but the reality is we can get ourselves so, going in circles and trying to do too much that then we're not doing that one thing because we don't remember what it was we're supposed to do. Right. So it's true. It is right exactly what we need to recognize.
So a couple things that you can do to eradicate your fluff. One is to challenge your view of grading. Think about your feedback and what that loop looks like with your students and how much time it takes. You might question, do the students even read your comments? I know we all want to think that absolutely our students read our comments and they're better for it, but sometimes I'm not sure about that. So really rethink how your time is best spent. Is it best spent grading, or is it best spent really developing some engaging lessons? And of course, I'm not saying don't grade. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we might want to look at that feedback loop. Research will tell you when you give students feedback, they really do much better when they have to look at that feedback for another product. So if we do a rough draft of writing, we give feedback and the students have time to actually absorb and look at that feedback and then create a better outcome. That's when that feedback loop really works well. So just challenge your view of grading because if you're doing less grading, you're going to have less volume. Also homework, think really critically about each assignment's likelihood of enhancing student learning. If it's not helping students learn, it's really pointless and causes you more work, which is the whole point of fluff eradication is, let's figure out what we should be doing and what we don't necessarily need to be doing. There's very little positive research about the correlation between homework and achievement, especially in elementary school. In middle school and high school, there is a slight correlation, but it fades after about 90 minutes a day of homework. And I recently read we have to do some evaluating here on our curriculum and instruction team, and I read a teacher's response about homework. And what she's done is created the homework to be a mindful activity. So instead of giving the students an academic task, they need to go and do a mindful activity at home and then report back on it the next day. And what I loved about that is you're giving the students some responsibility. They have to take that out and do that activity, bring it back and reflect on it, but you're also teaching them a skill that is going to be a life skill that they're going to use for the rest of their life. So I thought that was pretty cool. There are some suggestions here for just volume control, and it's really about purging and figuring out what do we absolutely need to do and what can we let go of. It says let go of perfectionism, and sometimes that's really challenging as educators. I think a lot of us are type A perfectionists, but sometimes we just kind of have to let that go a little bit. I really like this this flow chart. It basically walks you through a work project and kind of using the different cues, it lets you know whether or not you need to keep the work project or whether or not you can eliminate the work project. And so the big thing here is to just take a minute and think about what you do each day. And if there are things that you're doing that are not necessary, and I bet there's one or two, it's one of those things that you get to say, I'm going to stop doing that. And that's okay. It's okay to purge physically, but also work task related. So just take a minute to think about those things that you do every day and see if there are some things that you can maybe eliminate. And we also would like you to think about stop overcommitting as well. One of the things, the strategies that I've used in the past is to have a no statement ready. And so when people come to me and ask me if I'd like to be involved in a committee or if I'd like to lead this charge, I always have a statement ready. And typically that statement sounds something like, thanks for giving me the opportunity, but with my other commitments, I don't think I could give this the attention it deserves. And what I like about that is I'm thanking them for thinking of me, but I'm also saying, what you're leading or what you're wanting help with is really important, but I don't think I have the time to do it right now. And so it gives them some positive input about what they're doing and some support in what they're doing, but also letting them know that I can't right now. Barb, do you remember your no statement?
Yeah, I have an example of that with, I would have just said, I used this, I said, not now. can't help now. I can't commit to that now, but I will support and be an ally. And I did that once. Specifically, I remember my principal requested me to take on building lead for writing curriculum implementation, which was really an obvious choice for me because I taught all the writing at the grade level, and it was really a passionate area of curriculum for me. But I was already committed and involved very much in the PBIS leadership team in my school as well, which was a huge time commitment, and also I was well into that. So it wasn't a good time for me to shift my energies, and it wouldn't have been productive on any level, even though I really would have loved to have done that and might have been drawn to it. Probably a couple years earlier would have taken on both.
Right.
So it is that no statement. What you're saying is really important to have that ready to go, because you know, we tend to love to get involved and do a lot of things and help. There's that helping thing, but we do have to be able to say no. And
also, if you need time to think about something, just ask for that time. I think a lot of times we feel on the spot and we feel like we have to say yes or no right there, but we don't. We can say, can I have the day or the evening to think about it? Let me sleep on it, and then come back the next day with, no, you know, I can't for X, Y, and Z, or yes. And sometimes a yes is okay. We're talking about fluff eradication, but a yes is okay if it really is something that builds you up. I know that I would say yes to anything really that involved interventions, because that was something that really helped me feel like I was making an impact on student achievement. And so that was something that actually decreased my burnout, even though it was a little bit more work. It helped me just kind of increase my resilience because it was something that I cared about.
right.
We're going to talk a little bit about efficient planning and organization. So there are some tips here for planning. One of them is to use technology. And I know that as I'm planning, I actually use my Google Calendar to go ahead and set deadlines before they're actually due. And so I'll get pop-up reminders of that, which helps me just be efficient in my planning. And then collaborating, I use a technical system, typically Google Docs, that allows for online collaboration so that I don't have to meet with a team. We can do all that right within the document, and it saves a ton of time. You get everybody's input, and it just seems to work really well. A couple other ideas, it says keep the good ones, and what I meant by that was just create a file of great lessons or great activities that you've done with kids. And we can revise those when you pull them back out to use them, but just to have that and know we don't have to continuously reinvent the wheel is really powerful. And then use your resources, whether it be another teacher or online resources for lesson planning or activities, use those. Be careful about multitasking. Research out there now is kind of saying that it's not even really possible to multitask. So even though we think we're doing it, a lot of times we are compartmentalizing. And sometimes it causes a little bit more stress than it could to just focus on one thing at a time. So just be aware of that. Under the organization column, we talk about decluttering your classroom, and then we say purge again, and you know, we can do this at home and at school. I think sometimes just having a much more organized space helps us to feel just less anxiety. So we definitely advocate that you purge again and again. And then one of the things I like on here is have the students keep the room clean. I think that increases student responsibility and ownership of the classroom, and also decreases your stress level at the same time. This slide on self-care, Mike Anderson is an author. He wrote The Well-Balanced Teacher, which is a great text. And he says, we must learn to take better care of ourselves so we can take better care of others. So there's a bunch of different words on here, but a couple things that I wanted to hit on are food, which we all love to talk about and interact with. And I know you've heard it over and over and over again, but it's really important for us to eat breakfast, have high protein snacks available, healthy snacks available, drink lots of water, maybe create a food log and just log, you know, what you're intaking into your body. And then, of course, exercise. And I know we don't love to talk about it, but the truth is that even if we start small and do a little bit, 20 minutes of exercise a day, that's going to help decrease burnout and increase resilience. You know, maybe you want to find a partner or a group. Maybe you want to make it part of your work routine. Maybe you walk at lunch. You can also exercise with the students. And then I've also seen teachers move while they work. And so they wear like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, and they're actually counting steps as they're teaching. They're pacing back and forth in front of the classroom. I've actually seen teachers try to get to their 10,000 steps while they're waiting for copies at the copy machine. Barb, I know you have an awesome exercise routine. Can you talk about it?
I think as a result of burnout and recognizing that I really needed to have had to address that need in my self-care was for exercise. And a friend of mine who's also in the education, she's a school nurse, we were talking about it and decided to try out our workout before school in the early morning hours. And we were both parents with kids at home, and we realized and discovered what a wonderful thing that not one person needs us at 5:30 in the morning. Not one. Nobody. Just us showing up, and the YMCA happens to open at 5, and we just developed some great habits of getting that exercise done, and was very powerful for me when I did that in the morning and came to school, faced the day, worked with all the things that came upon my teacher plate, and then was able to walk away and think, all right, we're good. I did that one thing for myself at the beginning of the day, and it was very empowering for me from just that self-care standpoint. And then also just knowing that I had the energy that gives me. It's really, it comes back to you, even though the alarm clock rings too early.
That is pretty early.
Yeah, it's extreme. But, at the Y, there are a lot of teachers before school. So
nobody needs them at that time.
It's not that strange. Yeah.
Well, speaking of alarm clocks, sleep is pretty important when it comes to self-care. Research actually shows that sleep causes loss of memory. It's sleep deprivation, causes loss of memory or cognitive functioning. It can decrease performance and alertness, and it also increases people's risk for injury and illness. So it's not just making sure that we get our 8 hours. It's really there are impacts of not getting an appropriate amount of sleep. Not only to yourself, but to your students as well. Some things that I've really focused on at home with my own kids, especially in this age of technology, is sometimes you have to get your brain ready to sleep or brain ready to rest. And so my daughter uses some of the yoga apps on her phone to kind of get her brain ready to rest. I have disallowed my son to use any technology probably about an hour before bed. And we usually do showers in the evening, and that seems to kind of bring everybody's energy level down a little bit and then kind of gets them ready for sleep. So those are a couple strategies that I've used. If you have concerns about physical safety in your classroom, I really want you to talk with your administrator and make sure that you have a solid plan. You might need walkie-talkies or code words, or maybe you have teaching partners that you can help with that. But if you're feeling like that's an issue in your classroom, please touch base with your administrator. Some other things are to disconnect and then reconnect. And so disconnect, what I mean by that is maybe you want to think about not having your school email attached to your phone, your smartphone, because when it's right there, it's really easy to just kind of get sucked in, and then you find yourself working all the time. So disconnect from that. Maybe you get home and you put your phone in a drawer for a couple hours. But then also it's important not only to disconnect from work, but to reconnect. And what I mean by that is really reconnect back with all those things that lift you up. And maybe it's nature or meditation or prayer. It might be, just something as simple as reading your favorite book. So just some things to think about in all of that self-care. Just always go back to what lifts you up. So you might be asking, now what? What do we do with this information? We know how to maybe increase some resilience and decrease teacher burnout. And we know that 85% of teachers became teachers because they wanted to make a difference in children's lives. But to do that, we have to make sure we're building our own resilience and protecting ourselves from burnout. So you have to make yourself fireproof. And so what we'd like you to do is think of one thing that you've learned about today, or maybe you have your own idea, one thing that you're going to commit to doing tomorrow and going forward to lower your stress level and increase your resilience. And we had a handout for you, and it looks like this. You can find it in your handout section. And what we want you to do with this is just rate your level of teacher burnout. You can see there's some fun little descriptors there. And then also choose a strategy, or you can even write in your own strategy on the bottom of the page there. But just kind of make a commitment to doing one thing and just doing it really well. And then many times when I do this, if I create a plan for myself, I'll hang that up in my, funny enough, my bathroom, so I see it every morning, but then also by my desk or by my computer as well. So hopefully this will give you kind of a step of how I can move forward and build my own resilience.
Fantastic. Keely, thank you. I think we have just a few minutes left, so we may have time for one, maybe two questions. And while we're pulling those together, I just wanted to share with you a couple of great suggestions that came in relation to the question you asked about how are administrators supporting you.
Great.
Kristen chimed in and said they have something at their school called the SOS Awards. And if someone goes above and beyond to help another staff member, they received an SOS award. The award was an actual life preserver that they hung behind their desks for a week. And an email also went out telling everyone what happened and how it was earned. So it definitely helped the staff feel very thankful.
That's awesome. I love that idea.
That's creative.
Yeah, there was another comment from Roberta who said they have a new building principal, which has to be a challenge to walk in to a new school building. But he quietly supports us and makes us feel that what we're doing is of value. So some very nice comments.
Great.
So go ahead. I think, like I said, we have just a few minutes. So Keely, why don't you fire away with some of those questions?
Okay, great. Well, I have one here that is, what are the signs of burnout? So that's a pretty easy question to answer. It's going to look different for every teacher, but many times you're going to see teachers that are just tired, physically and emotionally tired. They might describe it as, I'm just exhausted, I'm feeling overwhelmed. You might see teachers that detach a little bit or withdraw, even socially, or maybe they're missing out on optional meetings or different things like that. You might hear teachers asking, why am I doing this? Why am I in this career field? Sometimes those teachers will begin to have a little bit of self-doubt, saying, I'm not really great at this, or I'm not good at handling student behavior. Oh, this is just not my cup of tea. Sometimes it might look like boredom. For me, that was one of the things that kind of crept in as a special education teacher. I was doing a lot of repetitive type things, and for me, that boredom did creep in a little bit. So to kind of just, I guess, listen for some of those things. And sometimes you'll hear the teacher that maybe complains chronically or is overly focused on when is our next break, when is winter break, when is spring break. And so, you'll see those things and you might hear those things. And sometimes, unfortunately, it can lead to teachers or educators just neglecting self-care in general. So you might see some of those signs. To piggyback on that, I also had another question that asked, if you're noticing signs of burnout in a fellow teacher, how can you help them? And there are some things that you can do. First and foremost, you want to make sure that when you're addressing the teacher, that you have a solid relationship with them. It's hard to hear some of that feedback, but if you have a really good relationship built with them, it's easier. And some school districts will have some opportunities for it might be that they will allow a sabbatical, or maybe they'll allow for a change of position until you kind of build yourself back up. But it's also important for you as that person's colleague or friend to just remind them that they have had some positive outcomes and some successes, and then maybe help them develop a plan. Maybe share the handout that we had today with them as well, and help them develop a plan of how they can take a step toward building their own resilience.
Great suggestions. Thank you, Keely. Thank you to Keely and Barb for sharing all of their fantastic experience and expertise with us this afternoon. As a reminder, if we didn't get to your question, we will respond to you personally or add them to the webpage at the end that you'll receive a link to tomorrow via an email, along with a recorded version of the webinar. So we appreciate you taking the time to join us for the webinar today. We hope you have a well-balanced dinner, get out for a nice walk, and get a good night's sleep tonight. So thank you all for joining us. Have a great night.